Hi everyone, I'm Shelly from There's No Place Like Home at redheadmom8.wordpress.com. If you have ever watched any of my other videos on my channel, or if you have visited on my blog, you're probably aware of the fact that I am not the biggest fan of compulsory schooling. I often refer to the history of public education, and I've made references about the fact that they don't really teach kids in a way that kids are able to learn. And I always seem to dance around the issue though. And the reason that I do that is because it's like one of those topics that it can kind of offend people, especially when you are a homeschool mom talking about the public education system, which is why I know a lot of homeschooling parents try to steer clear of this issue. And that's really what I try to do. But the fact of the matter is that I am really passionate about this issue because I have had kids in the public school setting. And not only that, I've really done a lot of reading and research into the history of compulsory schooling. So while I know that not everybody is going to like what I have to say today, I've finally come to the realization that I'm not doing anyone any favors by holding it in. So here we go. Today I'm going to share with you the real reason why public education is never going to get any better. And I'm sure you've heard, it's always on the news or in the newspaper or people talking about it. The United States public education system is pretty terrible. Not to mention all of the terrible violence that goes on and the terrible situations between students and teachers going on. But just the sheer academics of it is pretty bad. Our school system is not good. And the fact is that it's not going to get any better. And I know that you're always going to have people just giving you their different theories on what needs to be done to make education better. And I know that I do it at times too, because I really think that in my heart of hearts, I would love to see the day that the public education system would say, that's it, we're going to make some changes because what we're doing isn't working. So yeah, sometimes I even will do that. I'll say, well, this is what they need to do to get better. And you know what? It doesn't matter how much testing, they do, or if they take testing away, or if they do more hands-on learning. The fact of the matter is that the public education system is never going to get any better because it's doing what it was already intended to do from the very beginning. I think that a lot of people who haven't looked into the history of public education, and this is what I thought too before I looked into it, but we all think, free education for our kids. What an opportunity. This is an amazing thing that we're offering to our kids. But if you look back into the history of it, back in the 1800s, when the compulsory school laws took effect, you will realize that the compulsory schools were never about education at all. So let's just go back. I'm not going to delve into the entire history of public education because, first of all, I am not qualified to go over every single thing that happened. I will link to a fantastic video in the description box that will help you where I miss. I'm just going to kind of give you a little synopsis of it. Okay, so I'm just going to go over a few things. Back around, I'm thinking around 1819, I'm not completely sure, the Prussians decided that they were going to start a new conditioning campaign for their population. Yes, conditioning. And the goal of this conditioning was so that they could create better soldiers, so that they could train good citizens. And there are actually several things that they had in the list of things of why they wanted to do this. And the way they presented this to their population was, this is going to be free education for everyone. And it wasn't voluntary though. It was mandatory. So what ended up happening, a few decades later, we in the U.S. are in the midst of the Industrial Revolution. All of these new factories were coming out, and, they needed workers for these factories. And you have to keep in mind that before the Industrial Revolution, people were pretty self-sufficient. They worked their own land, they made their own clothing, They built their own houses, they made their own soap, they pretty much did everything on their own. And yes, of course, as a community, they would come together and they would share their expertise. But it was not the consumer-driven society that we have now. People had genuine skills and they were able to take care of themselves and they were able to take care of their families. The problem was that since people were so busy doing all these things, because I'm not going to say that was an easy life. It was a very hard life, but it was a rewarding life. And the problem with that was that they didn't have people to work in these factories. So what the people who brought compulsory schooling decided to look to was the Prussian model. And an interesting thing that you will notice actually with the history of American schooling is that there are a lot of people involved in it, involved in the inception of it, that had a lot to do with the Industrial Revolution. You know, like John D. Rockefeller. I'm sure that you've heard of him. He had a very large part in the inception of compulsory schooling. Also Carnegie, he also had a lot of say into it. And actually, I came across a really interesting quote by John D. Rockefeller. And in that quote, he was referring to compulsory schooling. He said, I might not get it exactly right, but the gist of it is, I'm not interested in creating a nation of thinkers. I want a nation of workers. And I know that I completely messed that up, and I'll share a meme with that at the end. But that was basically what he was saying. He was not hiding this fact. When compulsory schooling was originally instated, okay, it was not to educate people. It was to train them to become obedient factory workers, to become obedient citizens, and they wanted to get everybody almost like on the same wavelength, okay? They wanted everyone to basically have the outlook that the powers that be wanted them to have. So I know that a lot of times you will hear of the public education system being referred to as the indoctrination centers. And people usually say that tongue-in-cheek, they usually say that sarcastically. But in all honesty, that's really what they were meant to be. The compulsory schooling really was just a gigantic social engineering experiment. And that is exactly what it is today. So that's really why I want you to understand that when people talk about how, you know, kids aren't learning the way that they should be in these schools, the fact is that the kids are doing exactly what the entire purpose of compulsory schooling was for. Okay, because the difference is that you might not realize it, but there is a difference between schooling and education. And what the kids get in the public education system, yes, we still call it public education system, but they are not educated. They are schooled. And the difference between education and schooling is that when someone is schooled, they are told what to think. They are, you know, given the facts, okay, this person who is a scientist, historian, or some other credentials, they said that this is the case. And you don't need to worry about it any further. This is the truth, and this is what you need to know. And when someone is being educated, they're not told what to think. They are told how to think. And I don't even want to say told how to think. They are taught how to think. They are given the opportunity to explore and to reach conclusions on their own, because that is a major difference between schooling and education. Schooling is looking at something and thinking, okay, that matter is already settled. That person is more intelligent than I am. They have more credentials than I do. So there's no point in looking into it any further. Okay, that's settled. Whereas a person who is really being educated would say, well, I'm not really sure how that works, and I'm not sure if I believe that. I'm going to look into this further and see if that's the same conclusion that I reach. And that is really the difference, because compulsory schooling is not meant to educate. They really do just want to train people to think the way that they want them to do. And one way that they do this is schooling, which is why I've referred to this before, you know, in schools, it's really about parroting information. They just want kids to be able to spout off names and dates and to pass their tests. And to be quite honest with you, I don't think the powers that be really care whether your kids remember what they've learned in school or not. Now, I am not going to say that this goes for teachers. I am not saying that the teachers are in on this. I know of so many teachers who genuinely care for their students and are really trying to do what's best for them and to make the best of what is becoming an increasingly bad situation. So I'm not going to say that teachers are doing this on purpose. No, I am talking about the entire foundation behind it, which, you know what, I'm sure that a lot of teachers, most teachers in fact, probably aren't even aware of what it's all about. Okay. So anyway, now I lost my train of thought. So what they're doing is they want kids just to parrot back things, okay? And that is, it's all about making people conform to what they would like them to do. You know, it's about obeying orders, okay? Which is what happens when you are a worker. They want you to listen to your superior, to do as you're told, to not question it, and to move on to the next thing. And if you think about it, that's exactly what happens in school. You know, they're supposed to do as they're told, even if it doesn't make any sense, even if it doesn't matter to them in the least, they're supposed to do as they're told, the bell rings, they move on to the next thing and start all over again. And that is really what a factory is. And that's also why compulsory schooling is known as a factory setting. It is the factory school setting because that is how it is set up, as an assembly line for children. So that is one thing. And they break kids into groups, you know, and I'm sure you've heard of this. You know, you've got the gifted kids or the honors kids, and then you have, you know, I don't know what they call them now anymore because my kids aren't in school, but when I was in school, it was kind of like the gifted and honors, the highest group went together, and then beneath that was track 1, track 2, track 3, and depending on where you were in that situation, that was how your counselor determined what classes you were going to take. Now, for example, I was in the gifted and honors group throughout my school years, and I remember speaking to my guidance counselor. I think I was in 11th grade, and I told him that I was really, because I didn't have to take a math course my senior year. I already had all of my math credits done, and I was telling him that I really wanted to take accounting and bookkeeping. And he looked me straight in the face and he said to me, "You cannot take accounting and bookkeeping. Those are business courses and you are college prep." So I was not allowed to take the courses that I wanted. And instead I ended up taking no math courses my senior year at all. So somehow he was okay with that. He was okay with the fact that I would rather, you know, take no math courses than not be able to take the classes that I wanted to take. So that right there shows you that kids who are put into these groups in schools, they have a specific reason that they do this. They are categorizing students. And I really think it's important that you know this. Now, getting into the indoctrination. Now, yes, it does happen. They are indoctrinating the students to develop an outlook on life, a worldview that makes them the easiest to manipulate and the easiest to control. And now I know that a lot of people are thinking, this isn't my school, not my school. My kids are in a good school. There are a lot of people who think that. And a friend of mine actually, her grandson was in one of those better school districts, and she actually called me the other week and was telling me that she actually called the superintendent of her grandson's school district because he brought home a quiz that he had taken. Now he's in high school. He brought home a quiz that he had taken in his psychology class, and one of the questions on the quiz was asking whether or not drinking soda will affect the taste of semen. I'm not even kidding. That is what she said was on this. And she has a seat on the borough council. So she's well known in the area. So she did call and she spoke to the superintendent about this, and she was furious. Obviously, I think most people would be. She was furious. And what he said to her was, well, that textbook was approved by the school board, and to be honest, I can't read every single page of every single textbook. And, you know, that's true. They can't read every single page of every single textbook. But I'm telling you, You have to look into this stuff. You wouldn't believe some of the things that are in the textbooks of kids nowadays. So yes, indoctrination is happening. It is happening in the lessons of the kids at school. It is happening in the curriculum, like I just said. It happens even in the standardized testing, and you can bet that it happens, with Common Core. You can bet that there is a lot of indoctrination going on in Common Core. You really can't make this stuff up. I actually will leave another link in the description box to another video that I watched that was actually going over all of the they want to be in control of your children's morals. They want to be the ones that develop your child's moral characters, you know. So forget about parents teaching their kids morals. They want to be the ones that shape your kids' morals, and it is even reflected in standardized tests. So I do have a link to a video that I'm going to leave for that also, because again, the people who made these videos are way smarter than I am, and they have researched it for probably decades. And so, of course, they are the authority on this. I am just telling you what I have found out in my reading and of my watching of these videos. This is something that you really have to look into for yourself. Another thing that they are really trying to do, they really are trying to break up the family unit. And that is, if you think about it, that is something that really did happen when compulsory schooling started. I referred earlier to how people used to work together, and they used to grow their own food and, you know, build their own houses and all of those sorts of things. And families, you know, they worked together, they prayed together, they played together. There was an entire sense of community, not just among the families, but against people just all around them. And that's not how it is anymore, you know. Kids are taken from their families for anywhere from 6 to 8 hours a day, starting at the age of 5. And this happens for 13 years if you count kindergarten. So 6 to 8 hours a day, 36 weeks a year. These kids are taken out of their families, and they are basically being brought up by strangers instead of their parents. Now, I agree. I'm going to have people tell me, well, in some cases, you know, this is good. And you're right. There are instances where kids are better off not at home. But it's kind of a vicious cycle, because I will venture a guess that the whole reason that we have so many problems with the family unit today stemmed from compulsory schooling, which is what I'm getting into now, because this is what happened. They took kids away from their families. These kids were no longer taught all of the important things that they needed to know how to do in order to be self-sustaining as they were before compulsory schooling. And we became a consumer-driven society. You know, and look where we are today. How many people don't know how to do pretty much anything to take care of themselves anymore? We just have this mindset of, if we, you know, if something breaks, we'll go buy it. If we get a hole in our shirt, we'll go buy a new one. If our car breaks down, we'll go buy a new one. And it's just, that is the mentality that we have. And that is exactly what these founders of compulsory schooling had in mind. This is what they wanted, because here we have society now making them rich. And, you know, of course, John D. Rockefeller is no longer alive. But, you know, you've got all of the people who follow after him. And this is exactly what they were hoping for. We have changed from a self-sustaining society who genuinely cared for one another to a very disconnected society that can no longer do anything for itself. And it's because all of that precious time that used to be spent learning really important skills is now being spent in schools, learning things that most kids will never remember and won't have any impact on them in their lives at all. So after these kids are in school all day long, you know, oftentimes you have both parents working now because the kids are in school all day. And what ends up happening is a lot of the kids will end up going to daycare after they've been in school for 6 to 8 hours. So they're still not going home with their family. They're headed to daycare. And if they're not headed to daycare, there's a very good chance that they are in some sort of after-school program, oftentimes run by the schools themselves. And I have to tell you that a lot of the schools, I can't say all of them because of course I don't have experience with all schools, but I know that from our experience with my kids in school, that they would almost make you feel guilty if you did not sign your children up for these after school programs. You know, they would just say things like, if you want, or no, actually the kids would come home and they would say, Mom, my teacher said that if we want to do really well on our PSSAs, we should sign up for this test prep. And it's like, so parents are guilted into then signing their kids up for these after school classes. So, you know, 6 to 8 hours a day in school, gone. Then after school, in these after school classes, a lot of times for like an hour, sometimes hour and a half, they're still at school or at daycare. Then they finally get home, okay? And then what happens? They have to do homework because somehow 8 hours a day in school isn't enough time to get all of their schoolwork done. It doesn't make sense. So so many times I've had people come up to me and say to me, well, you know, the reason that they started compulsory schooling was because they were trying to get kids out of factories, you know, child labor laws. And, you know, if you really think about it, is that true, honestly? Because they were taking kids out of one kind of factory and they were putting them in a different kind of factory. Only this kind of factory, they have to go to by law, and they don't get paid for it. So I'm not really sure that I follow that reasoning of they're saving kids from factories, because the school setting is a factory. It really is. So now you have kids in school all day long, after school program or daycare. Then you've got sometimes 1 to 2 hours of homework after school. And then I'm not even going to get into like all the sports programs and everything that a lot of kids are signed up for. How much time is that leaving for the family? How much? And again, because it goes with the entire narrative of the reason behind compulsory schooling. They are doing this on purpose. Again, I'm not saying the teachers or even the principals are doing this on purpose. I am saying that the powers that be, they know there is a reason that they're doing this. It is not to educate children. It is to train obedient citizens. It is to train workers. It is to train people into the mindset of working for very little and to doing as they're told and accepting everything that an authority figure tells them. And if you look about it, they're doing a great job, because we've got all sorts of nonsense going on in the world today and people don't say anything about it. Why? Well, sometimes they're just blind to it. They don't see it. And other times they just have this really apathetic attitude, you know, oh, well, let someone else take care of it. I don't know anything about this stuff. I won't make a difference. We'll let someone else, someone, you know, who's higher up than I am, deal with it. No, that's not what we need to do. We need to take a stand, and we need to teach our children to take a stand. We need to teach our children to be self-sufficient and to help them to realize that they have a say in what goes on. And they really do need to realize that we are not servants, okay? And I really think that that's the mindset that a lot of us have. You know, it's supposed to be that our elected officials they're supposed to work for us, but does it feel that way? No. And that's just another one of those issues that it's really about accepting authority no matter what. Absolutely no matter what. And it's so ingrained in us that we'll do it, you know? And I actually have the perfect example of this. A couple weeks ago, 7:45 in the morning, my daughter, she woke me up and she said that it looked like the SWAT team was on our front porch. And me, you know, I was one of those kids in school. I really knew how to play the school game, and school really did well with me. They trained me to a T, and I was not about to question authority. I opened up the door, and they didn't even show any sort of ID or anything. They were looking for a fugitive or something. I don't know. But anyway, they didn't show me any sort of ID. They did not introduce themselves, and yet I still let them in my house. Why? Because I have it ingrained in my head that I have to submit to authority. And, you know, thank God that they were actually, you know, real officers, because that could have been disastrous if they wouldn't have been. Think about it. So I really, really, really urge you to look into the history of compulsory schooling. Whether it's through reading books by John Taylor Gatto. He has amazing books out there on the history of public schooling. And also there are lots of good videos out there too. But all I am asking you to do is just look into this, because I told you the truth today. Public education is not going to get any better because it's doing what it was intended to all along. If you have any comments, I would love to hear them. If you like this video, give it a thumbs up. And if you haven't subscribed yet and you would like to hear more of what I have to say, I would love if you would do that. And I hope you have a good day.